Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Knowledge finally back at it with another episode. It's been a while. I've been recovering from a major knee surgery that I had, and it's just been hard for me to even sit in a chair for a decent amount of time. So I finally got to a point where I can go for a little bit in the chair. We'll see how long I could go. But today will be the first of a series of episodes we'll be doing on C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. We'll be tackling part one today, which has to do with morality as a clue to the meaning of the universe. I think it's genius that he starts the book this way because it really does build a bridge for people who aren't Christian but are curious about Christianity, because Lewis puts his finger on something that is so familiar to all of us: morality. You know, we all get up every day and have to say please and thank you and just be immersed in a moral environment. We can't escape it. You know, it's something so familiar, something so intuitively true, something that we deal with every day. You know, we can go a long time without thinking about evidences for the resurrection or evidences for the reliability of the New Testament, but we really can't go a day without thinking and engaging in moral categories and moral actions. You know what I'm saying? So I think it's familiar to unbelievers and Christians alike. And also, I think it just sets a good context for a lot of those Christian themes like forgiveness and redemption and really the gospel message itself. So anyway, let's dive into it. So one of the first things that Lewis invites us to pay attention to or imagine is people quarreling, people arguing. You know, we've all heard people quarreling, people arguing. And if you pay attention to the kinds of things that people say when they're arguing, it really could clue you in on some stuff. So people say things like, how would you like it if somebody treated you that way? Or, hey, that's my seat, I was there first. Or, leave that person alone, they aren't doing you any harm, right? And so it seems like people are appealing to this standard of fairness or this kind of rule of right and wrong and fair play. And very rarely do you hear a person say, well, bump that standard or bump that sort of law of fairness, right? Normally, a person is trying to justify why they haven't broke that rule or making an excuse as to why there's a legitimate reason why they broke that rule. The point is, there just seems to be this shared rule of fairness, right, wrong, that we all seem to know and appeal to when we're engaged in argument. Now, traditionally, this law of fairness, standard of fairness, morality was called the law of human nature. And pretty much the law of human nature was just this idea that regardless of how different a culture was or a civilization was, there always seemed to be this standard of fairness, right, wrong, that was common to all humanity. Now, that doesn't mean that there weren't exceptions to the rules or people that disregarded this standard, the same way that we have colorblind people or deaf people or blind people altogether, right? We've always had exceptions to the rule, the same way we have sadists or psychopaths or there's always been exceptions to the rule. But the point is, wherever you found human beings and civilizations, you've always found some sense of right, wrong, and fairness. And that's how we've always been able to assess whether wars were right or wrong or just, or whether the Nazis were wrong for what they did. And we can debate. I mean, we always have debated who is right or who is wrong. And we've been wrong about the assessment of those things. But the ability to be able to do that has always just been believed to be possible. You know, we've always acted as if there really was a real right and a real wrong by which we can weigh the rightness or wrongness of a particular person or people group or government. Now, a lot of people have denied the existence of an objective right and wrong because we find these differences in cultures and different civilizations of right and wrong, right? Like, we've had people who've owned slaves and justified slavery and people who abolished slavery, right? There's been differences in morality. And a lot of people say, well, that proves that morality isn't a real objective thing. But Lewis points out that even though morality has been different at different times and different places, it's never amounted to that of a total difference. I mean, really think of what a total difference would mean. So he says here, I need only ask the reader to think what a totally different morality would mean. Think of a country where people were admired for running away in battle, or where a man felt proud of double crossing all the people who had been kindest to him. You might just as well try to imagine a country where two and two made five. Men have different as regards what people you ought to be unselfish to, whether it was only your own family or your fellow countrymen or everyone, but they have always agreed that you ought not to put yourself first. Selfishness has never been admired. Men have differed as to whether you should have one wife or four, but they have always agreed that you must not simply have any woman you liked. Now, you may dispute a couple of those examples, but the point is, where do we find cowardice praised? Where do we find betrayal admired or held up in esteem or as a model for other humans to emulate? We really don't see that kind of difference in morality across different religions, different cultures. I mean, Buddhism, Hinduism, Christianity. I mean, regardless of what religion or worldview people have had throughout the ages, we really don't see those types of behaviors being admired, praised, and held up as examples. And so there really does seem to be a core set of morality that transcends time, place, culture. And what's more remarkable than even that is the fact that even people who would deny an objective morality, you'll find these same people appealing to that morality on occasion. So you hear people saying things like, well, why is it fair for Joe to get approved in a vacation day and for me to be denied a vacation day when I never call out sick, when I'm always to work on time and he's always to work late? Well, how is it fair for this person to get a raise when I work harder than them? Or how is it fair that I got more severely punished when I didn't even violate policy? Joe violated policy. So the same people that would deny an objective morality, it's almost like it's easy for them to do this across the table from the person they're debating or arguing with, but they can't really bring themselves to live consistently with that idea. So we really do seem to believe in this standard or kind of just live out this shared context in which we believe there really is a real right, wrong, and standard of fairness. And one of the key insights about this standard is the fact that we all don't live up to it, right? Nor do we even live up to the standard that we hold other people to. A lot of times when we're accused of being selfish or prideful or mean or rude, we often make excuses as to why we're being mean or why we weren't actually being mean, or why in this case it was right for us to act in a certain way that may appear mean to you or selfish to you, but maybe this person did me wrong, or it's justified because this person is a jerk. Or we often find excuses as to why we're falling short of the law or why we aren't falling short of the law and actually we're upholding the law. We often make excuses or exceptions to the rule, which really shows that we really do believe in this law, even if we deny it, because we can't bear the fact that we're breaking that law or violating that law. There's something that's built in, that's true, that's binding, that we recognize is there, that we really want to honor. Another objection that we'll often hear is that, well, what you're calling objective good, objective right and wrong, isn't that just instincts? Maybe we've evolved with a certain desire to do good to people or to behave in a certain way. And Lewis points out you're really not understanding what we're getting at when we're talking about morality if you're reducing it to desires. He's not denying that desires aren't there or that we haven't grown or even sort of cultivated some of these desires to be good people or bad people even. But the point is, morality is something more than those desires alone. So check out this quote where he tries to establish this point. He says, supposing you hear a cry for help from a man in danger, you will probably feel two desires. One, a desire to give help due to your herd instinct. The other, a desire to keep out of danger due to the instinct of self-preservation. But you will find inside you, in addition to these two impulses, a third thing which tells you that you ought to follow the impulse to help and suppress the impulse to run away. Now, this thing that judges between two instincts, that decides which should be encouraged, cannot itself be either of them. You might as well say that the sheet of music which tells you at a given moment to play one note on the piano and not another is itself one of those notes on the keyboard. The moral law tells us the tune we have to play. Our instincts are merely the keys. So the point is, morality can't be reduced to instincts because morality assesses instincts. Going back to the example, we've all felt the desire to help a person or maybe stop and do the right thing, and at the same time a desire to go on about our business and just do the convenient thing and be safe. And we've all wrestled with this third thing, which is telling us, you know what, you should stop, you should inconvenience yourself and do the harder thing or the slower thing or the inconvenient thing because that's the right thing to do. Another objection we find is, well, what if morality is just a social convention? What if it's something that we just learned? We were taught it from our parents. We were taught it from, our particular time, place, and our period in history. That's just, we learned it. It's a social convention. It's not anything objectively real, right, or wrong. And one of the things that Lewis points out is that, well, first of all, we can't assume that what's learned is not objectively real or true. So let's think about math, for instance. So we all learned our timetables, right? That 2 times 2 equals 4, and 4 times 4 equals 16. And even though we were taught that, we learned that it is something that is objectively real. Mathematics is just lumped into the structure of reality, right? So even if we weren't taught 2 times 2 equals 4, 2 times 2 would still equal 4. Now, we may call 2 by some other name and 4 by some other name, but the point is, if you take 2 objects and 2 more of those same objects, you now have 4 of those objects, regardless of, the linguistics or the terminology behind it. The point is, these are real objective realities, irrespective of whether we've learned them or not. Now, C.S. Lewis is saying morality seems to hold the same status as mathematics. Why? Well, going back to the earlier point, morality, regardless of how different it's been throughout the ages, has never amounted to anything of a total difference. Why is it that regardless of what period in history you're in, cowardice has never been praised, but betrayal has never been held in high esteem? People who double cross their friends and people who lie, cheat, steal, kill for no reason, they've never been praised as heroes or held up as people or models of humanity. And that is significant given the fact that, the world is a big place, right? It really means something that people who have had no relation to each other have somehow had a shared moral framework that seems to look very similar despite the subtle differences here and there. And aside from that, the whole idea of moral progress hinges on the fact that morality must be real. It must be something objective. So let's take, for example, the question of slavery in America. Will we say that we've progressed morally, that it was a morally progressive move for us to abolish slavery? Or was it merely a moral change? So if we say that we've progressed as a people because we've abolished slavery, then that means that we really do believe in an objective standard, because all progress requires a goalpost. Anytime you talk of progress, you're talking about not just movement, but movement towards a particular aim, goal, or an ideal. Otherwise, it would just simply be a change. It's not that we've progressed because we've abolished slavery. We've just changed as a people. So ask yourself, did we progress in abolishing slavery, or did we simply change? If you say that we progressed, then you believe in a moral standard, an objective moral standard, an objective right and wrong, because you're saying that there is an end zone, there is a goalpost, right? And we've gotten closer to that. Even if we've missed it at times, even if we aren't all the way there yet, the point is we're moving forward. We're not just moving around. And so typically when you ask people this, most people will agree that we have in fact progressed. They wouldn't just say that we've changed. And one of the biggest insights to all of this is the fact that morality seems to be something above and beyond the facts. So let's go back to the idea of morality as the law of human nature. Lewis points out that this is different from the laws of nature, because when we talk about the laws of nature, we're not talking about laws that are obeyed. So let's think about gravity, for instance. When we say that, if you throw a rock up, it must obey the law of gravity and it must come down, we're not saying that that rock is consciously obeying the law of gravity. We're really just describing what happens. We're really just describing the facts, what is the case. But when it comes to morality, the law of human nature, it really does seem to be something above and beyond the facts, because one, we're not describing what always occurs. We're describing what ought to occur when we're talking about morality. So again, think about the idea of jumping in the river to save the drowning person, or staying on dry land because you want to remain safe. But which one of those ought to be obeyed? Which one of those ought to be followed? Now, it's not as if, the person who stays on dry land and just calls 911 instead of jumping in the river is a coward necessarily, or that he's wrong. A lot of us in that situation would, choose to remain safe. We got wife and kids and all that kind of stuff. That's not the point. The point is, why is a person praised for jumping into the river? Why do we praise courage and self-sacrifice and selflessness? Why is that something to be admired? Why is that something to be held in high repute, right? The point is, Morality is getting at something above what is the case. So it can't be identified with the facts the same way that the laws of nature are identified with just what is. What are the facts? What happens? Morality is telling us what ought to be the case. And so it's pointing to something beyond nature, beyond just the facts themselves. So Lewis then gets at the discussion of, well, what worldview, what idea of reality best makes sense of this morality that we find ourselves with, this thing that seems to be above and beyond the facts. Now, traditionally, people have either found an explanation in materialism or in religion. The materialistic view says that, well, matter is all there is. So their explanation of morality is naturalistic in nature. Morality is to be defined as something grounded within the natural world itself, whether that's just within our biological makeup or, just the way, the things we've learned from culture, some of the things we discussed earlier. That's more of the materialistic view. The religious view has amounted to something that points beyond matter itself. There's something about morality that seems to be grounded in something higher than nature itself. Now, as we're trying to assess, well, which worldview makes the best sense of morality, one of the things that Lewis points out is that we cannot decide whether materialism is right or whether religion is right by science. And this is a fatal flaw that a lot of people make when they're trying to, answer this question of, well what's the right worldview? Materialism or, a religious worldview or, something in between. You can't figure this out by science because it's not a scientific question. So science explores that which is in nature. It explores the natural world, right? And if morality is something above and beyond the natural world, then it's above and beyond the domain of science. Now, science is valuable, and we need science for scientific related discoveries and questions that we have, but morality is not a matter of science. We can never get at whether it was right or wrong for the Nazis to do what they did to the Jews. I mean, we could think of a scenario where science may indicate that it would be more efficient or conducive to human survival to eradicate a particular people group who maybe carry a disease or some sort of like genetic defect that can actually affect mankind, right? But science can never tell us whether it would be right or wrong for us to commit that sort of genocide. Science can never answer the question of why there is a universe or why are we here or what's our purpose in life, because those aren't scientific questions. Science explores the universe. So how can it tell us about matters that are beyond the universe or if there is something beyond the universe? The only way for us to figure those types of questions out is if ultimate reality reveals itself to us, which, spoiler alert, did happen at the incarnation of Jesus Christ, but we haven't gotten to that point yet. The point is, ultimate reality would have to reveal itself to us, or we would need some sort of insider information. Now, none of us have been rocks or tables before, right? But we are humans. So in the one case where we do have insider information, we do find something more than the facts, something above and beyond the facts, right? So again, we have desires, we have instincts, but we also have something that seems to be above those things. There really does seem to be a mind behind the universe that really cares about right conduct. There really does seem to be an absolute goodness that's trying to move humanity in a particular way closer to that absolute goodness. And it's not like materialism or religion have been the only ways of accounting for morality or meaning in all these deeper questions. I mean, you do have a lot of views in between, but those views in between, if they don't ground morality in God, then they ground it in some sort of life force. And now C.S. Lewis points out, when people talk about a life force, we really need to ask, well, describe this life force to us. Describe what you mean by life force. Because a lot of times when people describe what they mean by life force, they really are describing God or a God, something more like a person behind the universe, in which case they might as well just go ahead and admit that they do believe in God. And if not, then they must ask themselves, could this life force be something like wishful thinking, somewhat of a tame God? And they should at least be concerned with the idea that this life force, what if they're moved by the idea of a life force because it's impersonal and thus they don't have any obligations to obey or worship or order their lives after this life force because it's impersonal. It's not a personal God or a personal being, but it's more so like just this impersonal force, which means they kind of get to have their cake and eat it too. It's almost like having a sort of tame God where it's like they can cut him on when they go to the Grand Canyon or when they listen to beautiful music or, watch movies that seem to, be pointing at something beyond this world, but they can cut him off when it comes to, cheating or lying or sexual morality or stealing or, some of the vices that we commit whenever we fall short of this standard. Even if people who believe in the life force don't think that they're, creating a tame God after their own image, they should at least entertain that possibility. Could it be that you're suppressing the fact that there really is a God that you're accountable to because you don't want to be accountable to him? At least entertain that possibility if you do believe in the life force. But back to the idea of a supreme goodness or a mind behind the universe. If there really is a supreme goodness, then on the one hand, that's great news. I mean, behind the universe, back in all of reality, is a supremely good being, right? So, I mean, that's good news on the one hand. But on the other hand, that could be the worst news because, again, we've fallen short of this goodness. We've violated that standard. And we don't live up to the standard that we hold other people to, nor do we live up to the standard that we even have for ourselves, right? We fall short of this goodness. And if there really is an absolute goodness, then we have cause to be uneasy. What does that mean? What could that mean? Where do we stand in relation to that absolute goodness? So there's something comforting on the one hand, but also something very terrifying. And Lewis is saying as we're trying to think about reality and as we're trying to discover, well, what's true, we should really be aimed at truth and not comfort, not which view makes us feel nice and cozy and kind of gives us less anxiety, because that'll actually keep us from discovering the truth itself. So he says at the end of this part of the book, if you look for truth, you may find comfort in the end. If you look for comfort, you will not get either comfort or truth, only soft soap and wishful thinking to begin with, and in the end, despair. So somewhat of a cliffhanger there. Again, this is just part one of Mere Christianity. C.S. Lewis is saying that morality is a clue to the meaning of the universe. There really does seem to be a mind behind the universe. There really does seem to be a supreme goodness that is trying to get humanity to behave in a certain way, that is trying to get humanity in a particular relationship with itself. And again, I just think this is genius because it really does build a bridge for people who aren't Christian to get them to consider things that they really do experience, that they really do find within themselves. I think all of these examples, we all can find ourselves somewhere in those examples. We've all felt fear, a desire to do what's good, but at the same time, this sort of temptation to do what's wrong because it's more convenient. We felt the guilt of making the wrong move. We felt the impulse to do the right thing. And sometimes we've done the right thing and we felt just the rightness, the goodness of just doing the right thing, right? These are experiences that regardless of what religion you have, you feel these things, they're very real. And I think in that sense, he can kind of communicate to everybody, regardless of where they're located at in terms of their worldview. And also, I think it just really sets the tone to understand things like forgiveness and redemption and the gospel message. We really do need to think about good, evil, and sin, the idea that we've fallen short of this moral standard that even we have for our own selves, let alone what that standard may look like for a supremely good being. So anyway, that's part one of Mere Christianity, morality as a clue to the meaning of the universe. In part two, C.S. Lewis really gets into Christian theology in particular in light of some of the things we've discussed today. So stay tuned for that. Like, comment, subscribe. Let me know if y'all have any other questions, objections, or, critiques in any way, or anything you're just curious about, like what struck a chord with you in this episode, what was confusing. Let me know in the comments. But till next time, grace and peace, Soli Deo Gloria. Y'all be blessed.